Okay, welcome back. So now let's start getting into the meat and potatoes of this training. So what we've done is broken the training into two sections for you. The first, we're going to be looking at coaching, and then the second module, we will look more specifically at the NLP. And the reason for doing this is to understand that coaching is separate to NLP or therapy or hypnosis or any other modalities that we might use. That being said, within my coaching, I can utilize some of these other modalities, and we'll have a look and see how that's done. So first of all, if we turn to page 5 in your manual and talk about the ICF core competencies. Now it's important for me to highlight that this training is not ICF certified. Okay, so ICF, if you don't know, is the International Coach Federation. And although this training is not ICF certified, I think as a good coach, you should have certain core competencies. There should be certain things that, you are able to do as a good coach. Now, I'm not going to read each and every one of these. We're going to do a highlight of what the core competencies are, touch a little bit on each of those, and we'll see as we progress through the training, both within the coaching and in the NLP, how actually we do meet these competencies. So the first one we've got there is meeting the ethical guidelines and the professional standards. Well, there is actually from page 10, there is the ICF Code of Ethics, and we'll look at the Code of Ethics once we're done with the core competencies. Then number 2, we've got establishing the coaching agreement. And so here you need to have this ability to understand what's required in the specific coaching interaction and to come to an agreement with the client about what the coaching process is and what your relationship is. So further along in the training, I have given you an example of a coaching agreement, of what that might look like. And we'll touch more on that when we actually get to there. Some of the things that should be included and why they're included. Number 3, you should be able to establish trust and intimacy with the client. So create a safe, supportive environment that produces an ongoing mutual respect and trust. In doing this, we're going to show concern for the client's welfare. We're going to continuously demonstrate personal integrity, honesty, and sincerity. We need to help establish clear agreements and key promises. We're going to demonstrate respect for the client's perceptions, their learning style, their personal being, etc. And, we want to provide ongoing support and champion the client, champion them in their new behaviors and their actions. And this includes actually risk-taking as well, and helping that client through potential failures that they might have, or certainly fear of failure as well. And we'll see later as we look at the presuppositions of NLP, what the fear of failure, well, actually there is no failure, there's only feedback. And so as if we accept anything that doesn't quite work out the way it's supposed to as feedback, well then of course we can go ahead and create the type of results that we want. And last one there is we want to ask the client for permission to coach them in sensitive new areas. What the client comes to you with as a problem or their goal or the outcome that they want to achieve is not necessarily always the problem. And so we'll see as we go through coaching and as you coach the client that sometimes new things and other things pop up. And so we want to ask the client if it's okay to coach them in those areas. Number 4 is coaching presence. Now you've heard the saying, the lights are on but nobody's home. And so we want to be totally present for the client. We want to be able to be fully conscious and create a spontaneous relationship with the client. We want to be open and flexible and confident. In doing this, you should be able to access your own intuition and trust your own knowing. Being able to go with your gut. Now, interestingly, is you as a coach don't actually need to be an expert in every area that you coach your client in. And we'll talk about that again later. you can be open and should be open to taking risks, but also be open to not knowing and not having the answers, because it's not our job as a coach to have all the answers. One thing to bear in mind is, as we use humor is very important. Humor is a great way to break down barriers, great way to build rapport. But we must always bear in mind that humor must not be sexist, ageist, racist, classist, and any of those other sists that you can think of. Demonstrating respect for the client. And so be very aware of how you use humor. Certainly stay away from politics and religion as well. Of course, then number 5 is active listening. And, there's a difference between listening and hearing. And so we should really be able to focus in on the client. What are they saying? What are they not saying? Both verbally and non-verbally. A lot of NLP actually teaches us how to pay attention to the client. Both what's being said verbally and non-verbally, as well as what's not being said. And we'll have a look as we go through the NLP section of how to really pay attention, how to listen to predicates, how to listen to modal operators, etc. Number 6, powerful questioning. And so it's really important for a coach to have the ability to ask questions which are actually going to help the client get to the results that they want. Ask questions that are going to reveal the information needed for the maximum benefit to the coaching process. So these are going to be questions that actually reflect active listening. And we're going to ask questions that evoke discovery and insight and commitment and action from the client's part. Asking open-ended questions. Ask questions that move the client towards what they desire, not questions that ask the client to justify or look backwards. And in fact, one of the questions that we typically try to avoid is the question why. And the reason we want to avoid the question why is twofold. For one, often why can seem confrontive. And so if you ask the client, why did you not do that? It can come across quite confrontive. The other reason is that why very often leads us to excuses or reasons. Now, if you remember the cause and effect equation, of course, we want to move away from the effect side and to cause. So we want to avoid the question why. Now, there are certain places where why is important, but for the most part, we avoid it. So next, direct communication. And so it's important here to be clear and articulate and be direct in sharing and providing feedback. And we'll talk about feedback later. You must know how to reframe and how to articulate to help the client understand something from a different perspective. Be able to clearly state coaching objectives and meeting the agenda. And also, the purpose for doing certain exercises and techniques. Use language that's appropriate for the client. None of the cysts. Not ageist, sexist, racist. Try avoid technical jargon as well. We should be able to use metaphors to help illustrate a point. Metaphors are wonderful ways of getting a point across or helping the client see something from a different perspective. And we're specifically going to look at how do we create a metaphor during the NLP section. Step number 8, creating awareness. And so this is the ability to integrate and to accurately evaluate multiple sources of information and to make interpretations that help the client to gain awareness and thereby achieve agreed upon results. So we should be able to go beyond, what the client is saying. We don't want to get hooked on their descriptions of things. It's important for us to hear the client out and let the client say what they need to say. But we're going to see when we look at the presuppositions of NLP that we don't want to buy into the client's model of the world. We work in their model of the world, but we don't buy into it. We're not going to get hooked into it. We want to invoke inquiry for greater understanding and actually help the client understand and help them create awareness and clarity for themselves. helping them understand what's really the underlying issue. You know, are they limiting beliefs, negative emotions, etc. Help the client to discover new thoughts, new beliefs, new ways of thinking. And also, of course, be able to communicate on a broader basis with the client and inspire the client to take commitment and, of course, also to be accountable for those commitments. Now, number 9 is all about designing actions. And these actions, you know, are opportunities for learning, for growing, helping the coach and the client to get to the agreed outcomes. Now, here we can use things like brainstorming as an example. In fact, I love using brainstorming. And just a little tip, when you do this, actually do it live in the session with the client. You know, sometimes coaches send the client away and say, okay, you go and do a brainstorming session. Well, that can work, but what I've found is actually doing a brainstorming session there and then with the client actually works much better. One of the things to bear in mind with brainstorming is there's no right or wrong. And let the client just, as the name suggests, brainstorm and just throw out all the options, just write them all down. There's no right or wrong. And sometimes some of the best options and opportunities actually come from the strangest places. So brainstorming is a wonderful tool. We're going to promote experimentation and self-discovery. We want to celebrate the client and their successes. We want to challenge their assumptions, of course, where it's useful for the client. You know, we're not there to tell the client that they are wrong, but we want to challenge their assumptions in places where it will be useful to do so. We want to help the client do it now. So just like we're doing brainstorming in the session, get the client to do things and tasks and exercises right there in the session if they are appropriate. And of course, we want to stretch the client and, albeit stay within a comfortable area for them at least. So we don't want to stress them, not unnecessarily. However, that little bit of a stretch to get outside of the comfort zone and challenge them a little bit, step by step, as they learn how to do that, because a lot of people are stuck in their comfort zone. Step number 10 is about planning and goal setting. So the ability to develop and maintain an effective coaching plan with the client. So we want to help the client actually set their goals. You know, most people, I think, don't know how to set goals. And we'll talk about goal setting as we go through the training. In fact, we're going to look at goal setting from a number of perspectives. And by the time you finish with this course, you will understand how to set goals in a way that probably you never thought of or understood before. And then step number 11 is managing accountability. So the ability to hold the attention on what's important for the client. Yet we want to leave the accountability and responsibility with the client. And, you know, very often I hear about coaches that say to the client, okay, so here's your homework, this is the goal that you've set, so why don't you just email me or give me a quick phone call during the week or before our next coaching session, and, you know, keep me appraised, keep me up to date with what's happening. The problem with that is you become the client's accountability partner. And I think that in the long run, that doesn't really help the client. We want to teach the client or help the client learn how they can actually become accountable and stay accountable for their actions. And so, of course, we'll talk about that as we go through the training as well.